talk to anyone, everyone, so serve to change lives, 'cause lives can be changed forever. Serve to change lives whenever we're working together. Talk to someone right now. Start now and wow. When the right time arrives, you'll see you've changed lives. So serve to change lives.
Good afternoon, Rotarians and guests. My name is Bev Brock and I'm your MC for today's meeting of the Rotary Melbourne. We'd like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri and the Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation and also pay our respects to elders past, present and future, and extend that respect to all Indigenous Australians present today. Please note that most microphones have been muted for the duration of the presentation. Accolades, comments and questions can be posted via the Zoom chat function throughout the presentation. Thanks today will be given by Peter Dakin, followed by the Loyal Toast presented by President Reg. So please ensure your glass is charged.
Well, many thanks, Bev, and good afternoon, Rotarians and guests on this superb first day of spring. I'm wearing my demon scarf today in remembrance of our wonderful friend David Freeze. Whilst the spring sunshine will brighten us all up, the serious mental health issues in our society impacting young and old alike is finally resonating with our government, and mental health is threatening to be a much bigger concern than COVID-19 itself. This month's Rotary Down Under online edition indicates 1 in 5 Australians every year experience some form of mental illness. And one of the most significant barriers to improving prevention is the low priority given to mental health research. And Australian Rotary Health is assisting in that regard. Lift the Lid on mental illness has, of course, been a wonderful Rotary initiative. Thursday, the 9th of September is Are You OK Day? In my club role as sort of club almoner and involving member care, I urge all of you to reach out to fellow Rotarians and their partners who may be on their own, who you may not have seen during our 200+ days of lockdowns. As a start, you may consider contacting 1 or 2 members of your Rotary group to touch base and see how they are coping, because so many of our groups haven't been meeting during this period. Sunday is Father's Day. And once again, we're unlikely to be able to catch up with our families. A number of our members who continue to live in isolation would, I'm sure, welcome your call. The camaraderie of Rotary has been severely tested during the past 18 months. It is up to all of us to take responsibility and reach out to our fellow members and encourage them to stay involved with their great club. Thank you. Please ensure your glass is charged for the Loyal Toast, and I'll pass the meeting over to you, President Reg.
Thanks very much, Peter. Rotarians and guests, a toast to Australia and Rotary International. Australia Rotary International. And with regret, Valet David Freeze. It's with great sadness that I inform the club of the passing of our dear friend and colleague, David Freeze. David was inducted into the club in July 1975. He was sponsored by 2 giants of the club, David Whitner and Barry Council. He was given the classification menswear manufacturer. He made men's suits, and some of you may have been lucky enough to own one. Graham Kennedy owned numerous. And for many years, David was chairman of the National Menswear Industry Body and a director of the Fashion Council of Victoria. He fought a rearguard action against offshore manufacturing, winning orders to export locally manufactured men's suits, jackets and trousers to Singapore, Taiwan and Hong Kong. He seldom missed a luncheon meeting and was unforgettable. With his unforgettable smile, he engaged everyone he encountered. The advent of COVID and our Zoom response enabled him to continue his almost 100% attendance right up to the week before last. When asked about his long-time membership of the club, David replied, "I am most proud of Rotary's many philanthropic achievements throughout the years and extremely happy about the many friendships shared during my 46 years of membership. Also, that I served on the board of directors for 2 years." David was also a well-loved member of the Toorak No. 1 group. His great love for the Melbourne Football Club is legendary, but you may not know of his love for tennis. He described himself as a fanatic. He played the game all of his life, reluctantly giving it away in his 90s. And did you know he was a Melbourne Cricket Club member for over 82 years? Now back to his great love for the Melbourne Football Club. David lived and breathed Melbourne all his life. He was a long-time member of the Melbourne Coterie and he didn't hold back in supporting the club financially. A couple of weeks ago, he saw Melbourne's great comeback win against Geelong to win the minor premiership. He knew Melbourne was on the ascendancy. If Melbourne can do it this year, there will be a tear in the eye of everyone who was blessed to know David. He was an esteemed and much-loved member of the club. He will be sadly missed. He passed away last Saturday at the age of 97 years. The funeral was held last Sunday with the service, and the service can be viewed until this Friday. Joe has the details if you're keen to see it. His beloved wife, Ruth, passed away in 2018, and we've passed on condolences to his daughter, Sally, and their family. Sally we have the good fortune of Sally to be with us today. So let us now remember David with this rendition of his most favourite anthem.
It's a grand old flag, it's a high-flying flag, it's the emblem for me and for you. It's the emblem of the team we love, the team of the red and the blue. Every heart beats true for the red and the blue, and we sing this song to you. Should old acquaintance be forgot, keep your eye on the red and the blue. It's the emblem for me and for you. It's the emblem of the team we love, the team of the red and the blue. Every heart beats true for the red and the blue, and we sing this song to you. Should old acquaintance be forgot, keep your eye on the red and the blue.
Members, visitors and guests, it is my great pleasure to welcome you to our 9th meeting this Rotary year and our 4,905th club meeting in our 101st year. And thank you all for joining us in this online format. Our guest speaker today is Gideon Haigh, journalist and writer, speaking about his new book, The Brilliant Boy, Doc Evatt and the Great Australian Dissent. Gideon will be more fully introduced later in the program by Chair of the Day, Tony Greenwood. In the meantime, please join me in making them both welcome. And now it's my great pleasure to conduct the induction of Stephen Rando into membership of Rotary Melbourne. I asked Stephen's sponsor, Bev Brock, to formally introduce him to the club. Stephen's mentor in the club will be Quinn Scalzo.
President Reg, it gives me great pleasure to introduce for membership of the club, Stephen Rando, who holds the position of Senior Technology Project Manager at the ANZ and will have the classification of Project Manager Technology. He'll be a member of the Toorak One group and will be known in the club as Stephen.
Thank you, Bev. Stephen Rando, it's good to have you here. We feel like we know you because you spoke so professionally to us just a couple of weeks ago. We welcome you as a member of the Rotary Club of Melbourne. Today, you enter an organisation of more than 1.2 million members in over 35,000 clubs in more than 200 countries, embracing the internationality of Rotary. We believe that you have the personal and professional qualities that will ensure the principles of Rotary will be safe in your keeping. The Rotary badge, which we hope you will wear with pride and will be couriered to you soon, indicates your commitment to the object of Rotary, to which we all aspire to encourage, the ideal of service above self. We expect that you'll become an ambassador from us to the community in which you live, and we ask that you convey Rotary's aims in all that you do. We look forward to you pursuing with us the great work of Rotary. So with this expectation, we offer you the virtual right hand of fellowship and ask that members join me in welcoming you to membership of our beloved club. Congratulations, Stephen, and you might now like to say a few words.
Thank you, Reg, and thank you, Bev, again. Indirectly and directly, I'd just like to thank everyone for your assistance in the onboarding. A very humbling experience for me today to be part of such a great club, and all of you leading your own professions. I really look forward to meeting you face to face and sharing an old chinwag in terms of stories of assisting others, and as well as professionally. So again, thank you all. I really look forward to catching up with all of you. And again, very humbling experience, and look forward to working with you all.
Thanks very much, Stephen. Okay, now for a few announcements. The first thing is an update on the footy tipping competition, and which we run annually as a fundraiser. I call on Bruce Davidson, organiser, to report on the successful 2021 tipping competition.
Thanks, Reg. Once again, we had a good year. It was a lot of fun. The AFL did well to complete the season. It was difficult again with venue changes and the AFL bubbles in operation, etc. It was often hard to work out what the home ground advantage was. But every year I tell members that it's a game of skill. It's not a raffle, it's a game of skill. And the same people always end up at the top of the table. This year it was Spencer Bock, former member, who won the competition. He started well early and he held his nerve to win with 136 correct selections. Second place went to Loretta Fink. Her son, Noel, he told me that Loretta's 90. So this is a game for everybody. And she came second, and well done. Rosemary Nixon was the best placed member of the club, and Joan Endersby finished in the money. Other notable performances include Peter Hollingworth, again, and Peter Rogers. Deb Yinfu's cat Sophie finished a creditable 18th, and her other cat Buddy finished 48th. The Dakin dog Duke finished 59th. In all, we had 114 tippers. Not really enough. This is slightly less than last year, but a lot less than previous years. We lost our sponsored Dixon Advisory. That's been going for a good while and had probably run its course. A sponsorship to the value of $200 or $300 for prizes would be much appreciated. Rotary Footy tipping raised $2,000 for the club, for the Health and Ageing Committee for the Christmas outing, when they take isolated and hard-pressed folks down the peninsula for lunch before Christmas. It's an iconic club initiative. It's been going for decades and it deserves to be well funded. The financial success of the footy tipping is really dependent on the number of tippers. The costs are fixed. So if we can find an extra 10 tippers, we make an extra $400. An extra 25 tippers, an extra $1,000. This year I recruited 6 tippers, one in Ballarat, one in Sydney, one in London. I was pretty desperate. Early next year, I'll be asking you to sign up for footy tipping and asking you to recruit others. It's a great fundraiser for the club, and members should think it's $40. How much money have you saved through the lockdown? You should all sign up. Once again, a special thanks to Bill Endersby and Wilderness Wear for sponsorship. But not only that, Phil puts a whole lot of his staff in. He pays the $40 and recruits them, and they enjoy a year's tipping on him. And they cleaned up a lot of prizes, as I said, Jane included, but maybe she pays for herself. Note I'm all dressed up with nowhere to go. I wasn't heading off to the Sofitel today. I wish I was. I've got my Melbourne tie on for no other reason than respect for David Freeze, a beautiful man who did so much for the Melbourne Football Club. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Bruce. And I guess one of the things I should acknowledge is your indefatigable work on the footy tipping competition, amongst many other things in the club. And Bruce, I just want to extend our thanks to you for keeping the spirit of the tipping competition going. I now call on Club Governance Director, Peter Davis, to launch an interesting and recently approved club project.
Thanks very much, President Reg. It's very much my privilege and pleasure to announce the latest fundraising project of the club, which has been made possible through the sponsorship of Victorian Mortgage Group and the generous support of its Managing Director, none other than our Rotarian Bernie McIntosh. This project has the potential for raising ongoing funds for the club, which is will help with an ongoing challenge that we have always, is to maintain the flow of funds to the club, which will and diversify the funding sources so that we're not so heavily reliant on subscriptions. The arrangement that we have is a referral arrangement where hopefully it's a case of everybody benefiting. The club benefits, potential borrowers benefit, and where the way it will work is that any loan that is referred to VMG through the club. Now that can be through members, it can be members themselves, it can be members' relatives, it can be members' friends. The only qualifying requirement is it's come through a referral from the club. The loans that will qualify will need to be subject to certain criteria, of course, and there are qualifying criteria for the security to be offered, which is restricted to housing, and whether or not the loan and referral is possible and ongoing support is possible will depend on whether or not the loan meets the normal lending criteria for VMG. That's something entirely up to VMG, but we hope that many do. Just to give you an example, on current, it is a variable rate arrangement, but on current arrangements, the idea is that members and friends of Rotary get to benefit. The standard rate for VMG is just a smidgen under 4%, but this arrangement will entitle the friend under the current rates to be 2.55%. So it comes at a considerable discount already. On top of that, the club would be entitled to an ongoing referral sponsorship of 0.25%. To put this into context, the average loan these days is around $600,000, and that would generate an $1,800 per annum benefits through sponsorship to the club through VMG. And that continues for the life of the loan, so it could go for many, many years. I'm pleased to say that early arrangements have been brought within the sponsorship, some early referrals, and we've got 2 qualifying loans already. So if you have any further queries or anything on it, please don't hesitate to talk to myself or to Bernie. We'd love to answer any queries. And yes, if we can get any loans across to Bernie, it would be of benefit to the club. But of course, it always has to be benefit to the borrower. And we're very hopeful that the discounted rate available would also result in a win-win situation where the borrower also benefits. Thanks very much, President Reg.
Thank you, Peter, and a huge thank you to Bernie McIntosh, who I know is with us today. I'd now like to give a few notices, and the first of these is that we are calling for nominations for our annual Seniors Award, Service to Seniors Award, made to a person whose outstanding service for seniors in a voluntary capacity is judged to have been made a positive difference to the lives of seniors. The receipt of the award can be both an encouragement to this person and the organisation for which they work or represent. The Health and Ageing Committee invites you to nominate a suitable recipient for the Service to Seniors Award by 5 p.m. on the 30th of September. So we've got a full month to put our thinking caps on. A nomination form has been circulated by email and in the bulletin this week. A quick word about the passing of Stuart Stribling's partner, Helen, after quite a long illness. And I just remind you of that. Full details are available from Joe. And we did have an NGV event scheduled for announcement today. We're currently planning the relocation of it, given the extension of COVID restrictions. Something I did want to talk, we did want to talk a bit about today is the terrific opportunity for Rotarians to get involved in supporting new leaders who lead the frontline responders in the Victorian Police. This is a project run by the Rotary Club of Melbourne Central and involves a number of other Victorian clubs who've provided experienced mentors each year to the Victoria Police. The program has been highly successful. Both mentors and mentees have enjoyed the exchange of experience and insights gained. The mentoring involves approximately 2 hours contact per month. And I'd just add my own comment on this, that the main benefit of this is to help senior police people taking on leadership roles in the police field, so to speak, to learn about their communities and build connectivity with the community. And in that sense, it's highly positive. Mentor matching will occur during September as the 21-22 program commences in October. Information is in this week's bulletin or from Joe, directly from Joe. I now move on to the Around the Bay Smith family annual raffle. As we've become accustomed, we have a very generous sponsor in My Ride Collingwood, who have donated a $2,000 voucher for the purchase of bicycles or any bicycle accessories that they stock. And I now have the pleasure my original plan was to have someone else draw this, but I've had to relocate into the office, so I'm here all by myself. And I can assure you these tickets have been fully mixed, and I'm now going to draw the winning ticket. Okay, well, I'm pleased to announce that someone we all know and love, Alan Trumbull, is the lucky winner of the $2,000 voucher. Alan will be in touch shortly about collection of the prize. I'd just like to close by thanking the Around the Bay team who have all, whether we have a pandemic on or not, always throw their hearts and souls into organising this annual fundraiser. And we're well on track this year to make a more than $20,000 donation to the Smith family as a result of this fundraiser. So I now have great pleasure in handing over today's meeting to our chair for the day, Tony Greenwood, who is going to introduce our guest speaker. Over to you, Tony.
Well, welcome, Gideon, as our speaker. And Gideon describes himself as an independent journalist. The Australian paper calls him their senior cricket writer. Now, that's three loaded words. Senior. Gideon's been scribing for about 35 years. Cricket is something Gideon loves and plays. And his body of work, of literature, covers about 27 books and innumerable articles. It's a minor wisdom. And writer. A writer is a journalist whose output is more than ephemeral. But besides cricket, Gideon has scored about 16 other non-fiction works. In 1987, I'd like to specially mention his first book, The Battle for BHP, a story of a huge game played for keeps with several companies and human lives. And that there's a couple of mentions of me in the book. Gideon notices things that others might miss. He's like a latter-day Samuel Pepys. In recent book reviews, he's introduced books about an anaesthetist, the perils of extreme wealth, Melbourne's 19th century sex workers, and the Dinero Boys. Our home enjoyed that last review because one boy was my father-in-law. So that's why it's a great pleasure to hear Gideon today. He's going to give us a snapshot of Dr. Bert Evatt, who is a battler for the underdog, a politician, judge, and statesman of the United Nations. We look forward to Gideon telling us what he's noticed about the doc.
Thank you, Anthony. Nice bookshelves you've got there. Bit of a bookshelf off today, isn't it? Every time we get together, we get a chance to see inside each other's homes, which we might have been separated by COVID, but we're getting strangely intimate glances at one another's personal lives. Thank you for having me today. It's nice to be with you, I guess. We're not with you, but being with you while at the same time not being. And I was moved by that tribute to your former member, David Freeze, with his 82-year membership of the Melbourne Cricket Club and his lifelong allegiance to the Melbourne Football Club. I didn't even mind hearing a Grand Old Flag playing, despite the fact that the last time I heard it was after Melbourne beat us for the minor premiership in the last round of the season. Yeah, look, I guess in some ways it's an unusual departure for me to write about the law and to write about a figure like Doc Evatt. But I think my whole career, as Anthony was saying, has been a bit of a departure from whatever it is I've done before. I'm often looking for at areas of sort of abiding interest to me, but waiting for the opportunity to find a way to say something new about them. And in the case of Doc Evatt, he was a man who had been of interest to me for many years, until I read all the biographies of him. I knew about his place in Australian history. I knew at some length and in some detail about his political career. But I'd always held back from writing about him because I couldn't think of any way to approach him in a way that hadn't already been done. It happens that I'm one of the things I do on the side is I'm involved in a program put on by the National Judicial College. I've been involved in it for about the last 15 years, where the NJCA brings together a group of writers and has them mingle and advise a group of judges and judicial officers from different courts, different jurisdictions in Australia, with an eye to helping them write more lucid and accessible and better organised judgments. It's a really fascinating course. I find it very stimulating. It's always interesting to be asked about writing, the technicalities of writing, and in a particular sort of technical and often rather abstruse area. But a few years ago, the conversation in the faculty turned to the subject of the intersection between the law and literature. And mention was made in the course of that discussion to a court case, a High Court case from 1939 called Chester versus the Council of Waverley Municipality. And the judges all nodded sagely. And of course, as a journalist, I had no idea what they were talking about. But it sounded interesting. The story was that in the course of a fascinating dissent, Doc Evatt, who was then a member of the High Court, invoked the poetry of William Blake and Such is Life by Joseph Furphy in his elaboration of a particular set of legal ideas. That sounded very interesting to me, original and innovative. And so I thought, well, if there's something I don't know about, I'd like to indulge my curiosity and check on it. So I called up the judgment and I read it and I thought, this is terrific. This is the Evatt that I don't know about. This is the Evatt that most Australians will be unfamiliar with. This is the Evatt who is a original and thoughtful and perceptive and human figure making a judgment on a fascinating case, which is bound to have an intriguing backstory. I'll tell you the background to Chester versus the Council of Waverley. It goes back to a day in August 1937, when after a couple of days of heavy rain in Sydney, children emerged from their homes on a Saturday in Waverley near Bondi, and went back into the streets to play like good working class children out from under their parents' feet. There were 3 children in the Chester family: 15-year-old Benny, 12-year-old Rose, and 7-year-old Maxie. They'd been living in Waverley's Allen's Parade for about a fortnight. Later that afternoon, only the older 2 came back. We don't know exactly how they separated. It's hardly difficult to imagine, though. Apparently, the older 2 wanted to go to the movies and they didn't want to be carrying their 7-year-old brother around, so they kind of shrugged him off. But by the time they came out of the movies in the afternoon, Maxie had gone missing. And as happens, there was a sort of a neighbourhood search, everyone looking around for where this lost child might be, until after a couple of hours, attention concentrated on a ditch that had been left by council workers the previous week, that had been very poorly fenced off, but had filled with rainwater from the precipitation of the preceding 2 days. The police arrived, began to fish along the bottom of the trench, and alas, with the Chesters, Golda and her husband Hayham. By the side of the trench, the body of Maxie, who drowned, was pulled out. Mrs. Chester, Golda Chester, suffered a severe nervous reaction, a traumatic response to the loss of her son and the sight of his body being pulled out of the trench. A lawyer came in called Abe Lander, who was an original and interesting lawyer. Nowadays, we'd think of him as a plaintiff lawyer. And he wanted to sue the council for negligence because they'd failed to put up adequate fencing around the outside. Unfortunately, in those days, the only statute that he could use was something called the Compensation to Relatives Act, which meant that you could sue the council, but you could only sue them for monetary loss. And of course, Maxie was only 7, so there was no monetary loss to the family. It wasn't as though he was bringing in an income. So the only way to achieve some sort of justice for Golda Chester was to claim on the grounds that she had suffered from a nervous shock as a result of being present at the death of her son. It was an extraordinarily interesting piece of law in a country that was tended to take pride in its stoicism in time of loss. In fact, in some ways, you can think of Australia in 1937 as being a bit of a country in the grip of trauma, the residual trauma from the First World War, and feeling something of an impending sense of dread about the coming of a Second World War. But there was a reluctance to acknowledge maternal loss in particular, or female grief. And that's what Evatt took on in his judgment. Like I said, it's a fascinating piece of jurisprudence. Geoffrey Robertson, among others, has called it a masterly piece of jurisprudence infused with humanity and an example of Evatt's profound belief that humanitarian principles could be deployed by judges to develop a common law that would meet the needs and challenges of a changing world. But most of all, it gave me an opportunity to look inside the mind of a remarkable, distinguished, but rather forgotten Australian now, because people are probably old enough to remember the figure of Doc Evatt from the 1950s as being the somewhat hapless leader of the opposition who lost a string of elections to Robert Menzies and led Labor in a period of electoral ignominy. But the interesting thing, I think one of the things that really attracted me about telling this particular story was that it enabled me to shine a light on some biographical aspects of Menzies, because Evatt. Evatt was from rural Maitland in New South Wales. He was one of 8 brothers from a sort of a lower middle class family. 4 of those brothers were dead by the time he was 20. 2 of them died in infancy. 2 of them died during the First World War. The grief that his mother suffered from the loss of her 2 sons between 1914 and 1918, she never recovered from. And she died shortly after the First World War. And Evatt had been extremely close to his mother, so he had a very sophisticated understanding, I think, or a very acute understanding of how loss can ramify in a family and can be internalized, and suffering can be passed on down the generations. So in some ways, he was the ideal judge to be making an assessment of a case involving maternal grief. Interestingly, in the course of the Supreme Court hearing that preceded the High Court hearing of Chester's case, Mrs. Chester, Golda Chester, was asked to testify about her sense of loss. She was a Polish Jewess. The family had only recently arrived in the country. She spoke quite poor English, so she found it very difficult to communicate what her son had meant to her. But one of the ways in which she described him was her brilliant boy. Now, he was a 7-year-old boy who was obviously a sort of precocious, lively, fun, interesting, intelligent. And Evatt, in his own family, had had a similar mantle. His whole upbringing had been a pageant of scholastic honours. He'd been the pride of his family, and his mother never ceased to take pride in his distinction. He was such a prodigy, in fact, that Evatt is still the youngest man to serve on Australia's High Court. He was appointed to the High Court at the age of 36 by a newly elected Labor government, because he was a man who had who identified instinctively with the left of politics, with issues of social justice. He'd been a successful pro bono barrister in Sydney, had operated in areas of workers' compensation and extradition. And the Labor government, when they came to power in 1930, had the idea that they wanted to rebalance the High Court in a way more congenial to socialist or social democratic causes. He has a fascinating period on the High Court. He's there for about 10 years. He's a bit of a one out on the court because the law is a very conservative institution. He doesn't really have too many natural fellow travellers. And in fact, in the course of the Chester case in 1939, once again, he finds himself in the minority. The three other judges in the case, Latham, Stark and Rich, all find against the Chester family for various reasons. Latham says that, for instance, that death is an everyday occurrence and its effect on others is usually transient. Justice Stark says that the council was only bound to consider reasonable probabilities, normal persons and the ordinary range of human experience, thereby saying that, you know, a mother losing her son is outside the range of normal human experience. You have to read these judgments to believe just how harsh and belittling judges could be at the time, how little time the law had for anything other than a white, male, middle class to upper class point of view. What's remarkable about Evatt's judgment is that not only does he make the decision in Golda Chester's favour, but he does it in such a way that he identifies very, very closely with her sense of loss. You get a fascinating sense of a man, a judge, stepping down from the bench and communing with a woman in her suffering, putting in some ways, giving her the words that she was unable in her unfamiliar tongue to articulate herself. And the important distinction that he draws in this case, because the other judges rely on the fact that by the time Maxie was pulled out of the trench, he was already dead. Therefore, Golda Chester did not see her son die. Now, it's amazing that the law can actually draw distinctions like this, but it does. And what Evatt says instead is, you know what? Part of her suffering was the terrible sense of waiting that she experienced during the house-to-house search in the afternoon and hoping against hope that her son was still alive while fearing the worst. This is the way that he puts it in the judgment. He says, the plaintiff was a woman of Polish extraction and found special difficulty in narrating the precise nature of her feelings, her hopes, and her sufferings. But it is quite easy, I think, to perceive the order of events. It is abundantly clear that until the recovery of the body, she did not know that her child had been drowned in the trench. Like most mothers placed in a similar situation, she was tortured between the fear that he had been drowned and the hope that either he was not in the trench at all, or that, if he was, a quick recovery of his body and the immediate application of artificial respiration might still save him from death. In this agonized and distracted state of mind, she remained for about half an hour when the police arrived and the child's body was discovered and removed. During this crucial period, the plaintiff's condition of mind and nerve can be completely understood only by parents who have been placed in a similar agony of hope and fear, with hope gradually decreasing. Now, who hasn't lost a child? Anyone here who's had a child will know the feeling of losing them in a crowd, at the supermarket, at the Royal Melbourne show, at the football, that awful feeling, that moment that you look around and they're not there. And Evatt's capacity in 1939 to articulate that to a male legal audience is quite an extraordinary management, a leap of a management of imagination. In the lower court case, the Chief Justice Jordan had said that there was nothing to Golda Chester's claim because she had only been looking for the body of a child, the body of a child. What Evatt says in the aftermath of that is that she was not looking for the body of a child, she was looking for her child. And it's a crucial distinction. And it's a fascinating distinction. I could go on about this judgment, but it's 14,000 words. It's 6 times the average length of a High Court judgment from the 1930s, and it is a fascinating historical artifact when looked at in comparison to the other 3 judgments. It really does showcase Evatt's capacity to look beyond himself and his own world and his own sensibilities to understanding the grief and suffering of others. It is, in fact, the best of Evatt. You cannot read it without experiencing a great wave of admiration for his perceptiveness, and it's a great additional way to look at Evatt, a figure who we think of as quite familiar, we think we know all about, but in fact is constantly has lessons to teach even to subsequent generations. One of the interesting things about this case is that even though at the time the case failed because Evatt was overruled or outvoted by his fellow judges, the law eventually came round to Evatt's way of thinking. Finally, in a court case before the High Court in 1984 called Gents versus Coffey, a similar trauma case is heard by the High Court, and Justice William Dean is the one who says what everyone's thinking, which is that the High Court got it wrong in 1939 and that Evatt was right all along. Dean's own judgment is a very stirring piece of legal thinking and legal prose. Anyway, look, it's like I said, it's not an area where into which I thought I'd delve, but once I did, I find it exceedingly fascinating. I had to learn a great deal about torts because I have no legal background at all. I didn't even go to university. But there's nothing I like more than a book where I actually have to learn everything from first principles. I have to educate myself, and I have to basically put myself at school at the service of my subject. And it gave me a great deal of satisfaction to take a new slant on an old and familiar figure. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Gideon, for outlining to us something quite unexpected if we haven't looked at the book cover. I'm wondering if you feel that judgment embodies a principle that's speaking of some relevance to the sorts of things we're experiencing now, or was it just something that grabbed you and you feel that you'd outline it?
I mean, I have an abiding interest in the area of trauma. I mean, everyone has some sort of trauma. Most lives involve some sort of trauma, and it is an interesting question of how one deals with it. But in 1937, the idea of acknowledging same was a huge imaginative leap. You know, we took pride in those days on, getting on with things and stiff upper lip, and that grief was transient, and one should just pick oneself up and dust oneself off. And it was fascinating that the judges were so hostile to the idea that someone could suffer the grief at the loss of a child. It's almost unthinkable. It's even inhumane by modern lights. It took someone to take that first step. Every journey has to start with a single step. And I think that until that stage, the law had dealt specifically in terms of injuries for compensation as being predicated on injuries and lesions and physical wounds. To move into the idea that there could be mental suffering inflicted at the same time was extremely innovative thinking.
Thanks. Well, There's a question from Kathy. I invite her to unmute and ask the question. Oh, it was Peter Rogers wanted to ask. Peter.
Yeah, it's Peter Rogers. I'm using Kathy's laptop, but yeah, well done, Gideon. Extremely interesting. I just wonder whether Evatt had children himself and a wife.
It's a good question.
And
Yeah.
whether he drew on his own family experience here.
For sure. His wife was unable to bear children because of she had a medical problem, but they adopted 2 children, and they were extremely protective of the children. Evatt's daughter is still alive, Rosalind. She's now 90. She lives in the Blue Mountains. She said that the family travelled everywhere with its own linen. The children were never allowed to go to public toilets. They were obsessive hand washers because of the fear of infection. Rosalind said, I had the cleanest hands in Mossman. I was always being told to wash my hands. When their boy was young, they decided that they had to have fresh milk direct from a cow, so they bought their own cow. Evatt was also always had an extremely soft spot for children. He was very sentimental about them. He was very smitten with their innocence, and he regarded the protection of them as absolutely paramount. A very unusual father in his own era, in that he took a great deal of interest in his children's upbringing, was constantly present, always travelled with them where it was possible. So, like I said, in some respects, if you wanted a judge to look at a case like this, Evatt is precisely the kind of man that you would ask for.
Thanks, Rob McGurk. Do you want to continue the discussion about the traumatic effects?
Yeah, thanks, Gideon. Very interesting case. I'm just wondering whether you think the amount of trauma, obviously, that's been created through COVID, do you think there's a chance that it might get to the courts where that could be tested in the future? Because it'd be a floodgates if it did. But just wondering what you think about that.
This is always the argument, and this is always the argument against extending courses of action any further than they absolutely have to. The floodgates argument. It was, and actually, this was one of the things that Evatt was coming up against in 1939 when he deliberated on Chester. There's an interesting case in Melbourne, in fact, in 1888 called Cultus versus the Commissioner of Railways, and it involved an accident or a near accident on Swan Street near the level crossing there, where a horse and trap were being the gate of a level crossing had been opened. The horse and trap had been taken halfway across the track, and a train appeared from nowhere. And the husband and a pregnant wife were in the trap, narrowly escaped with their lives, and the woman suffered a grievous miscarriage shortly afterwards as a result of the shock that befell her. The Victorian Supreme Court decided that she did deserve compensation for the mental shock of having been exposed to an accident. But the case went to the Privy Council in London, and the Privy Council decided that if they gave compensation to this woman, they would open the floodgates to all sorts of frivolous additional claims. And that's basically where the law stayed in Australia for the next 50 years. And it's amazing how long the shadow of individual cases can be that they eventually cast. And it was that principle, the Cultus principle, which is that you had to have a physical injury to go with the mental injury that Evatt was resisting in 1938. Now, the fact is that it didn't open the floodgates by any means. The law is more than capable of handling individual cases. In fact, if you take the floodgates idea to its logical conclusion, then you basically wouldn't have a law at all. The law has to be able to allow to deliberate between individual cases on their merits. There's an interesting case at the moment in the High Court called Victoria versus Kosarov, I think, which is about a lawyer in the sexual offences part of the DPP, who is claiming compensation for the depression that she suffered from being forced to work on cases involving child pornography. And, you know, one can imagine just how hideous they must be. And that she'd been exposed for a long period when it was pretty clear that she was not handling aspects of her job all that effectively. If the High Court decides in this woman's favour, then I think that particular aspect, that possibility of mental trauma, will be extended, and you might see a principle established under which future claimants can claim for the deprivations of COVID, particularly if it's involved the death of a relative and deprivation from being able to see that relative due to COVID restrictions.
Thanks very much, Gideon, for that presentation. And it was an obvious surprise to us all. I think we didn't know what you were going to talk about, but you've justified your reputation. Notice what other people have overlooked. We give our speakers these days a reward of Rotary R100 socks. So a pair will be on their way to you shortly, and we thank you very much for being with us today. And I'll hand back to President Reg.
Well, can I just add my thanks, Gideon, and we've spoken on the phone, and you've certainly exceeded expectations, I think, today. And what a marvellous foundation to understand the social justice perspective that Doc Evatt brought to the role of High Court judge. It's now my role to thank a few people, in particular our Master of Ceremonies for today, for our today's reflection, Peter Dakin, our Chairman, Tony Greenwood, and of course, Gideon, thank you again. Thanks to all members for attending, but particularly thanks to so many guests. I notice we've got the representatives of the Bear Brass Probus Club in our meeting today, and many other prominent people from District 9800. Thank you all for attending. We hope you've enjoyed the meeting. The reminder, next week's meeting is a 6 p.m. evening meeting, and our guest speaker is Mary Jensen, who's a high-performance executive mentor and coach. Her organisation is Mindset Master, and she's the CEO in Power. I hope you can join us for that, what promises to be another very interesting evening meeting. For all those Father's Days and carers out there, and we're discovering whole new dimensions of what that all means in lockdown. We'd like to wish you all a happy and safe Father's Day this coming Sunday. And to end the meeting, I'm going to play a brief little number called See a Hero. And with that, I will implore everyone to stay safe and spread kindness. Thanks everyone for being here.